Welcome to the Rise to Intimacy podcast. I'm your host, Valerie McDonald, and for over a decade, I've worked as a sex and couples therapist because intimacy used to feel really overwhelming for me. I felt a lot of pressure to perform, I was disconnected from my body, and I often felt like desire was out of reach for me. But through my own trauma work, I stopped checking out of my body and started feeling connected to it again. I learned what it's like to experience intimacy without fear, without shutting down, and without numbing out. Now I'm on a mission to help you do the same thing. This podcast exists because trauma doesn't get the last word. You can learn how to calm your body, change the story you've been carrying, and rebuild real connection. First with yourself and then with the people you love. Let's begin. If you've ever been lying in bed while your partner is out on a date with someone else, and your chest is tight, your mind is racing, and your stomach feels like it's turning inside out, then this episode is for you. Because what nobody tells you when you start exploring polyamory or ethical non-monogamy is that your brain can understand the concept, but your body is sending you a different message. And the gap between what you believe and what your nervous system feels is where polyamorous relationships either grow stronger or start to fall apart. Today, I'm going to talk about emotional regulation as one of the most critical skills in polyamory. We're going to look at what the research says, and I'm going to share some real examples from couples I've worked with. I'll also give you the honest truth about both the benefits of emotional regulation and the very real consequences of not harnessing the power of it. So when I talk about emotional regulation, here's what I mean. It's your ability to notice what's happening in your body, and instead of immediately reacting to those sensations, you're able to pause, stay grounded, and make a conscious choice about what to do next. It's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending you're fine when you're not. It's about having enough internal space between the feeling and the reaction that you don't say or do something that makes things worse. So let's start with what the research actually says about emotional regulation and polyamory. I mentioned this study in last week's episode, but I want to reiterate the findings today. A major meta-analysis published in the Journal of Sex Research in 2025 looked at 35 studies with nearly 25,000 participants and found that there were no significant differences in relationship satisfaction between monogamous and ethically non-monogamous relationships. So this means that the structure of your relationship, whether you have one partner or multiple, is not what determines whether you're happy. What predicts success is the quality of your communication, along with trust, boundaries, and emotional skills. And research conducted at Sacramento State looked at how polyamorous individuals respond to what researchers call new relationship energy. That's the excited, somewhat euphoric feeling that you experience when you start seeing someone new. This study found that mindfulness was directly linked to lower jealousy through better emotional regulation and distress tolerance. In other words, the polyamorous individuals who had stronger emotional regulation skills experienced less jealousy and more of what the polyamorous community calls compersion, which is the feeling of genuine joy and happiness you get when your partner experiences pleasure or love with another person. Another study published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior found that what predicted compersion wasn't personality traits or self-esteem. It was relational factors, emotional closeness with your partner, including clear communication about outside relationships and reduced feelings of jealousy. So compersion isn't something you either have or you don't. It's something that develops when the relational environment is safe and regulated. Now let's briefly compare this with monogamy. In monogamous relationships, jealousy is often managed through exclusivity itself, because the agreement that neither partner will be intimate with anyone else provides a built-in sense of security. The emotional regulation demand is lower in certain areas because the structure removes some of the triggers. But that doesn't mean monogamous couples don't need emotional regulation. Monogamous couples also benefit from having the ability to regulate their emotions so that they can better manage conflict, learn how to communicate effectively without being too reactive, and for maintaining intimacy over time. The difference is that polyamory takes everything that's already emotionally challenging in a monogamous relationship and amplifies it. As one research team noted, people practicing polyamory state that continuous and intense emotional work is required at levels monogamy does not generally demand. Research from Springer's Archives of Sexual Behavior found that emotional regulation skills may be at the heart of successful multi-partnered relationships. Because strong emotions can arise when a partner isn't available, or when a partner is experiencing something exciting with someone new, or when you're navigating situations that society hasn't given you a script for. And one more quick note about cultivating emotional regulation in all relationships is the research makes it very clear that emotional regulation is not just an individual skill, it's a relational one. Studies in attachment theory show that our ability to stay regulated is directly tied to how our partner responds when we express distress. So when you share that you're feeling anxious or insecure or stressed, and your partner dismisses it, minimizes it, or denies that it's valid, your nervous system doesn't calm down. It escalates because now you're not just dealing with the original emotion. You're also dealing with the pain of feeling unseen by the person who's supposed to be your safe place. Research by Dr. James Cohen at the University of Virginia, known for his work on social baseline theory, found that the brain literally works harder to regulate emotions when a supportive partner is absent or unresponsive. In other words, your nervous system is designed to co-regulate with the people you're attached to. When that co-regulation is missing, or when your partner shuts you down instead of showing up for you, even the strongest self-regulation skills start to break down over time. So if you're someone who's doing all the right things, you're practicing mindfulness, you're breathing, you're journaling, you're trying to name your emotions, but your partner consistently responds with defensiveness, dismissal, or silence when you bring something to them, it's not a failure of your regulation. It's a sign that the relational environment isn't supporting what you're trying to build. And that's exactly the kind of dynamic we work on in therapy, because both people have to participate in creating emotional safety for regulation to be sustainable. So, with all that as our foundation, let's talk about the pros of practicing emotional regulation in these relationships, as well as the cons of not practicing nervous system regulation in polyamory. So, the first pro is that jealousy becomes information instead of an emotion that leads to disconnection. When you have strong emotional regulation skills, jealousy won't just disappear. Because jealousy is an emotion that most of us experience at some point in our lives. But with the practice of emotional regulation, jealousy becomes something you can notice, you can name, and work with, instead of something that controls your behavior, which can lead to disconnection from your partner and negative feelings about yourself. Research found that when jealousy shows up in polyamorous dynamics, it can actually become a unique opportunity for conscious awareness, a chance to interpret the reasons behind the discomfort and communicate specific unmet needs to your partner. And that can be incredibly powerful. Instead of jealousy leading to accusations or ultimatums or shutting down, it can become a doorway into deeper understanding of yourself and your relationship. For example, a couple I worked with in the past started their relationship with varying levels of experience with polyamory. One of them had been practicing polyamory for years, and the other was much newer to it. When the more experienced partner started seeing someone new, the partner with less experience noticed a tightness in her chest and a nauseous feeling every time her partner left for a date with another person. Everything inside of her was screaming to text him long messages during his date, letting him know how much she was hurting and asking him to end his date and come home. At first, her anxiety felt unmanageable, and she wanted to react in a way that hurt him as much as she was hurting. But instead, she decided to practice calming her nervous system with emotional regulation skills we had been working on in our sessions. This included her pausing before reacting, and then noticing the sensations in her body and being able to name them. She also learned how to communicate this to her partner without shaming him or feeling guilty that she wasn't as comfortable as he seemed to be. She was then able to tell him she was feeling afraid that she was going to be replaced. And she was able to talk to him about this when she was calm, instead of reacting as soon as she felt triggered. And instead of her responding in a way where he felt accused of doing something wrong or feeling misunderstood, he viewed it as an invitation to learn more about her inner world and therefore to feel closer to her. And for her, instead of her using her discomfort as a sign to end the relationship, she used it as a sign to learn more about herself and ways she could manage discomfort that led to a deeper and more fulfilled relationship with her partner. And this is also a good example of that when she developed and cultivated emotional regulation, her partner also responded in an attuned way, in a way that helped her feel seen and heard, and essentially started asking her questions like, what would work better for you? So that was co-regulation on his part. Again, it doesn't just take one person in the relationship to manage all the work of regulating the nervous system. We also want our partner to be able to regulate and then co-regulate with us. Another advantage of harnessing emotional regulation is that you may develop compersion. Compersion is often described as the opposite of jealousy, but I think it's more accurate to call it the reward that comes on the other side of regulation. Because researchers found that compersion is strongly predicted by emotional closeness with your partner and clear communication about outside relationships. So when you can regulate your emotions, stay connected to your partner, and communicate openly, you create the conditions for compersion to naturally emerge. And this skill can transfer to every area of your life. The emotional resilience you build in polyamory makes you better at handling stress at work, in friendships, and in your relationship with yourself, because you begin to truly trust that no matter what life throws at you, you have a way to cultivate a sense of peace and calm in spite of it. Another pro is that your relationship becomes more intentional and resilient. Polyamorous relationships can't just run on autopilot and be successful. You can't rely on unspoken assumptions or cultural scripts about what's normal. Everything has to be talked about, such as boundaries, time, emotional availability, sexual health, and expectations. And all of that talking requires a regulated nervous system. Because research consistently shows that individuals in stable, long-term polyamorous relationships often develop stronger emotional intelligence and conflict resolution skills. And those skills contribute to higher overall relationship and life satisfaction. So the emotional work isn't just maintenance, it's actually building something stronger than what you started with. Another benefit is that you deepen your relationship with yourself. So one of the most underappreciated benefits of emotional regulation in polyamory is the self-knowledge and resilience it forces you to develop. When you sit with jealousy or anxiety or insecurity, instead of reacting to it, you start to learn what's underneath those feelings. Often it can be old attachment wounds, like fear of abandonment, or stories from childhood about inadequacy or feeling unlovable. For example, another couple I worked with discovered through their polyamorous journey that one partner's intense jealousy wasn't really about his other partners. It was about a deep fear of being left that started in childhood when his parents got divorced, and he rarely spent time with his dad after that. Polyamory brought that wound to the surface in a way that monogamy never had. And with support, he was able to start healing, not just for the sake of his polyamorous relationship, but for every relationship he had going forward. So now we're going to talk about some of the cons of not building and cultivating emotional regulation. The first one is that jealousy becomes chronic and unmanageable. Without regulation, jealousy doesn't just show up as a signal for how to better manage unmet needs or desires. It becomes a constant state of pain, anxiety, and sometimes feeling crazy, like having the thought of what's wrong with me, or how can my partner love me and still want to be with others intimately. But research shows that when jealousy is left untended in polyamorous relationships, it can lead to chronic anxiety, rumination, and repeated conflict cycles that erode trust over time. The jealousy doesn't just affect the moment, it starts to invade upon all of your interactions. You may start checking your partner's phone or start needing to know every detail of their other relationships, but not out of genuine curiosity, instead out of a desperate need to feel safe. And that hyper-monitoring doesn't build trust. It actually erodes the safety and intimacy in the relationship. And another downside is that reactive behavior replaces intentional communication. Because when you can't regulate, you react. And reactive behavior in polyamory is especially damaging because there are more relationships on the line. So this might look like sending a series of panic texts at 11 p.m. when your partner is having a sleepover with someone else, or giving your partner the silent treatment when they come home, or issuing an ultimatum in the heat of the moment that sends the message of it's either me or them. I've worked with multiple clients who agreed to polyamory, but had never done any work around emotional regulation. And for many of them, every time their partner came home from seeing someone else, they would either shut down completely or start yelling at their partner, accusing them of being uncaring and disrespectful. Some of them wouldn't even speak for hours, while others spent hours having drawn out, emotionally exhausting conversations. And then eventually, anger would come out, resulting in explosive arguments that were never fully resolved. Over time, the other partner stopped sharing anything about their other relationships, but not because they didn't want to, but because they were afraid of their partner's reaction. And the result was typically trust being fractured in a way that ultimately ended the relationship. And another negative side effect of not being able to engage in emotional regulation is that unhealed attachment wounds get activated without a safe container to hold them. Polyamory is not a good band-aid for unresolved trauma. In fact, it will do the opposite. It will amplify every unhealed wound you have. If you have a fear of abandonment, polyamory will trigger it. If you have a fear of not being enough, you're triggered. If you have difficulty trusting, polyamory will also trigger you. Research consistently shows that attachment anxiety is one of the strongest negative predictors of well-being in polyamorous relationships. Without the emotional regulation skills to hold those feelings and process them, they can become overwhelming, leading to emotional flooding, shutting down, or even controlling behavior that damages every relationship involved. And con number 4 is the relationship structure gets blamed for what is actually a skills deficit. So this is one of the saddest outcomes I see. A couple opens their relationship, struggles because they don't have the emotional regulation tools to navigate it, and then concludes that polyamory doesn't work. And while polyamory may ultimately be something they decide they don't want to practice, the structure alone really wasn't the problem. But the lack of emotional awareness and regulation skills was. And I see this happen in monogamous relationships too. Couples who say, we just can't communicate, when the real issue is that they've never been taught how to regulate their nervous systems well enough to have a productive conversation that leads to resolution versus resentment. Just like in the previous example, the structure isn't the main problem, but the skills inside the structure are. If you're practicing or considering polyamory, here are some tips you can use to start building these emotional regulation skills today. The first one is learn to regulate your nervous system before you respond, because this is the foundation. Before you text, call, confront, or withdraw, you need to learn how to pause. And one of the best ways to do this is to practice this when you're feeling mostly calm. but when you're dysregulated, notice what's happening in your body. Is your heart racing? Is your chest tight? Are your fists clenched? Do you feel nauseous or have a headache? Those are signals that your nervous system is in fight or flight, and you are not in a state where productive communication is possible. Practice slow breathing and move your body instead of staying stagnant. And learn how to ground yourself before you engage in any interaction with your partner. A second skill you can try is to separate your sensations from the story inside your head. For example, if you're feeling tightness in your chest, separate that from the thoughts in your head that may sound something like, "My partner loves his girlfriend more than me." Realize these thoughts are a story your mind is creating, because learning to notice that difference is one of the most powerful skills in polyamory, and honestly, in life. The sensation you're feeling is real, but the story doesn't have to be viewed as the only truth. Instead, it needs to be questioned, and it's something you can be curious about, instead of automatically making an accusation directed at your partner. A third tip is to build a self-soothing toolkit for when your partner isn't available. So in monogamy, your partner may be your primary source of comfort. In polyamory, there will be times when they can't be that for you, and you need to learn ways to be okay with not feeling okay. Your toolkit may include journaling, meditation, movement like dancing, calling a trusted friend, engaging in a comforting routine, or any number of mindfulness practices. Research shows that mindfulness is directly linked to lower jealousy and higher compersion in polyamorous individuals. So building your own regulation practices isn't just self-care. It's a relational skill that will benefit you throughout your lifetime. A fourth tip is to create a communication rhythm with your partners. This means not waiting for a crisis to talk about your feelings. Instead, set up regular check-ins with your partners. This can be weekly or even daily check-ins where you share what's coming up for you, what boundaries might need adjusting, and what you appreciate about each other. Because when communication is routine, difficult conversations feel less heavy. And a fifth tip is get professional support. Finding a therapist who is trained in working with non-monogamous clients and who understands emotional regulation from a nervous system perspective can be the difference between polyamorous relationships that thrive and ones that cause pain. So to quickly recap what we discussed today, emotional regulation is not optional in polyamory. It is the skill that determines whether your non-monogamous relationship becomes a source of growth, connection, and joy, or a source of chronic anxiety and pain. The research is clear. The structure of relationship doesn't predict your satisfaction. Your emotional skills do. And the beautiful thing about skills is that they can be learned. You don't have to be born with them. Your childhood didn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have figured everything out before you start. You just need to be willing to do the work consistently. If you're practicing polyamory and you're struggling with jealousy, or if you're considering opening your relationship, but you're not sure if you're ready, then I'm here to support you. This is exactly the kind of work I do with couples navigating polyamory. We build the emotional regulation foundation first, and then I help you navigate your relationships from a place of safety, clarity, and intention. And if you're interested in doing this work, you can book a complimentary 30-minute consultation with me at risetointimacy.com. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for listening to the Rise to Intimacy podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, know that healing is possible and you don't have to do it alone. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a rating and review for us at ratethispodcast.com/rise. It really helps others find us, and I'm so grateful for all your support. You can learn more about my coaching packages for individuals and couples at risetointimacy.com. And remember, sex therapy isn't for people who are broken. It's for people brave enough to look beneath the surface.